that you can see my screen, that would be really handy. It's working slowly, but it's doing it now. Has that worked for you, Sarah?
Yep, can see your
Great.
screen. Yep.
Cool. Okay. All right, lovely. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining me this evening, giving up some time in an evening. My name's Josh Dyer. I'm an educational psychologist. Our work in early year settings as educational psychologists, a lot of it is visiting preschools and nurseries and assessing children's special educational needs. We also, part of our training focuses on childhood development, especially early childhood development, including trauma and what sort of more modern term for trauma, what people call adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and what other people might sort of refer to or overlap with attachment. And so I'm going to spend the next, I think we've got 90 minutes. I'll certainly not go over 90 minutes, maybe a bit shorter. I just want to respect people's evenings and not drag it out for the sake of it. But I'll try to make it as sort of practical and useful and interesting as possible by talking about what trauma is, how it affects children, and most importantly, what we can do to help children that have experienced trauma. Firstly, I don't want this to be like a lecture of any kind, so I'd really like it to be interactive. So please join in by adding comments and questions in the chat. It's not like old-fashioned face-to-face training where people can break off and discuss things in groups, but the more examples people contribute in chat, the more things we can refer to from our own settings, our own experiences, the more personalized the training will be, and the more useful I hope it will be for everyone. So in terms of like the goals for this session, it will be finding the answers to these questions on screen, creating a shared understanding of what we mean by trauma or ACEs, which is, like I said, the more modern description that people tend to use for adverse childhood experiences, considering the impact of trauma on child development, and therefore how we might recognize signs of trauma in our earlier settings, and finally focus on new things we can try and things we already do, and there will be loads, to help reset children's expectations of caregiving and to boost their long-term prospects. Before I start, I just want to acknowledge the topic of early trauma can bring up deep and sometimes sad memories, both like personal and professional. I'll try to treat this topic with the seriousness it deserves, but I don't want anyone to feel too uncomfortable. That's not the aim at all. Please, look after yourself and step away if you need to. No one needs to have their camera turned on unless, they want to. Please join in with chat, but there's no other expectation really. Speaking of contributing in chat, I'd just like to start with a little kind of like warm-up, ice-breaking type of activity. There won't be too many activities, so it's not a quiz, it's not a test, but just in terms of creating a shared understanding and thinking about our personal definition of trauma. Would people mind just popping in the chat some ideas about what comes to mind when they hear the word trauma? Just words or phrases. When we hear that word trauma, and especially trauma in childhood, what comes to mind? What thoughts do we have about that? I realize I'm going to have to tab out to read some of the chat. Lovely. Thank you. Dundry Preschool. Obviously, I don't know some people's names. I just know where you're from. So Dundry Preschool, you're going to be referred to as the collective preschool. Yeah, thank you. An event that's caused distress. Yeah, loss, grief, or pain from Alicia. Thank you. Joe, Jolly, loss of life. Yeah, that's a really stressful event. That's what Magdalena's saying. Yeah. PTSD. Absolutely. Yeah. The T standing for trauma. Significant event in life. Being seriously ill, distress, terror. Significant event. Yeah, thank you, Helen, or both Helens. Stress, overwhelming ability to process information. yeah, something which overwhelms you. It could be traumatic, totally. A mental health condition, gemmas, but anything that impacts your emotional well-being, anything from moving house to losing a loved one. Yeah, I've just moved house myself about 3 weeks ago, and yeah, it was very stressful and did overwhelm us at times. Um, a terrible experience that's been witnessed. Yeah, thank you, Ashana. Uh, Bad experience. Yeah, that's it. That's it, Mandy, isn't it? Simply a bad experience, an event leading to a lasting emotional impact. Okay, lovely. Thank you. Sorry if I missed out any of those things. Yeah, neglect. That's a nice example as well, emotional or physical. Um, we um, in doing that, you can see, there's a range of examples there of the types of events that count as traumatic, and sort of the theme of those events, which is really things which are significant. We kind of separate when we're talking about trauma, um, you know, things which are uncomfortable or awkward, and things which are really significant. And I think a few people used significant life event and overwhelming life events, those kind of things. Um, in terms of a psychological definition, one sort of popular definition is trauma is anything that overwhelms a child's sense of safety. It's not just about the event itself, it's about how the child experiences it. For some children, even everyday stresses feel traumatic if they don't have support. So what we kind of mean here is that trauma is not purely about the seriousness of an event. It's or how it might seem to an outsider. It's a personal experience of an event, and in particular, it's about the perception. It's about how much help or safety you feel that you have when you experience something difficult. Um, so, two children might experience the same event, but what will define whether or not it's traumatic and has a lasting impact is really I'm simplifying it a bit here, but it's about their answer to this question: who's keeping me safe in this situation? And if children feel like no one is keeping them safe when something stressful happens, that's traumatic. And if people feel like they do have a safety net, people are looking after them, then they're more likely to be able to cope with that experience. Um, I mentioned that sometimes or use the term ACEs instead of trauma, adverse childhood experiences, and this term's partly come from research into trauma and child development, and researchers who've tried to define the kinds of events and experiences that cause trauma, and basically things which have a long-term impact on child development. And in the 90s, there was a bit of influential research, and it defined 10 different types or categories of adverse experiences, ranging from sort of some of the more obvious ones like physical abuse, emotional abuse, or sexual abuse, to maybe slightly more hidden examples that could be of traumatic experiences, like being neglected, whether that's physically or emotionally. And also a more sort of modern understanding of things which can be traumatic for children when family members have mental illness or there's an incarceration, going to prison. An unfortunately common one, which is really traumatic, is witnessing, domestic violence, especially seeing your caregiver and your mum being treated violently, witnessing substance abuse or drug taking, and divorce can be traumatic depending on how it's handled. Um, if we move on, by looking at from what we mean by trauma, we'll start to think about what the impact is of trauma on a child, starting with the impact on their brain. Um, on the screen is just a pretty basic kind of GIF of a brain developing in utero. This is a baby in its mum's tummy. It's I don't know if that's Spanish or Portuguese, but it means the weeks. So what a brain looks like at 14 weeks, 21 weeks, and 30 weeks. And in infancy, brain growth is at its most rapid. It's fastest in the womb, and gradually slows down by age 10 or so, when our brain is pretty much full size at age 10. Um, Some of the more impressive stats to me, anyway, about brain development for children is that by age 5, our brain is 90% of the size it'll be in adulthood, which kind of shows how important those first 5 years are in our life, and obviously some of those 5 years are time that children are spending with us in our settings. Um, in the first year of life, a baby's brain doubles in size, and in the first 1,000 days of its life, which includes from in the womb from conception, a baby is making more than 1 million new neural connections every second. The brain is the most complex thing in the universe. We don't understand it. There are trillions of cells and connections combined in a brain, but for every second, more than 1 million new connections for children under 2. So it's such a rapid phase of development at that age. Um, and trauma affects how brains grow. And in particular, it disrupts the development of stress systems, which means that connections are concentrated in fight or flight areas of the brain. Um, Trauma, we're creating more connections and more sort of habit of using stress systems. If we're experiencing a lot of trauma, it also affects our learning because when we're stressed, we tend to store memories in our subconscious, which seems to be some kind of defense mechanism, to protect us from painful experiences and painful memories. So if we're spending a lot of time in trauma, we're also repressing or suppressing or hiding a lot of the memories that we're making, which means as children we're not learning as much. The sort of common example of that is the idea of when women give birth, during childbirth. That's a really stressful and traumatic experience, and people's memories of that is often repressed to some extent. The brain hides the memory of giving birth, which means that if they're crazy enough, they might face childbirth again at some point. Um, and trauma also affects emotional regulation, means managing emotions. Um, the experience of trauma is almost like strength training, and builds the size and strength of brain structures associated with strong emotions like fear and anger. So those areas of the brain are getting bigger, stronger, consolidated, um, and babies experiencing trauma have less focus and less training of the areas of our brain that deal with positive emotions and positive brain chemicals. Um, on the screen is, well, sorry, that image just changed a funny color for me. I hope it still looks okay to everyone. Um, on the screen is an example of a brain scan, and it shows how long-term trauma stops connections from forming in the brain, which means there's less brain activity on a brain scan in areas associated with thinking and language, which are typically at the front of the brain or the top in this picture. That's kind of like the frontal cortex of your brain. Um, this picture is like quite famous, gets used a lot, and I think it compares a sort of typical child with a child that's actually been raised in like um, an orphanage, and raised in with a lack of sort of care and interaction. Um, it's really important to say here, and I will come back to this idea that although trauma affects the brain in a major way, the brain is a very resilient thing. It's constantly learning. I've just said I've just moved house, um, and even at my age, which is over 40, I can still learn the routes around the house, the new roads and things. Brains are still capable of learning, rewiring, adding new connections into right into up until the very end. Um, so although it has a major effect on the brain, trauma that is, it doesn't mean that it's not a life sentence, is what I'm trying to say. The brain is still capable of rewiring, and the brain is what people call plastic. It can be remolded and through life. Um, so all of that sort of little introduction could be summarized by saying traumatic experiences can sort of create a blueprint or a soundtrack for someone's life. It sets our expectation, how safe the world is, of how people are going to treat us, and how people will react to our behavior, and in particular, how they'll react to us when we need help or when we express our feelings. Um, the idea of like trauma creating the soundtrack for our life. You can, one example is, if you imagine yourself walking through the woods, looking around, seeing the trees. If the soundtrack, the music that you're listening to while you're doing that is something like calm and relaxed, classical music, like, morning has broken, then the woods look like a sort of magical, peaceful place that you want to explore. But if you're doing that same walk in the woods and it's like the soundtrack from Jaws, a sense of sort of terror building up in the music in the background, suddenly the woods seem scary and you're worried about what's behind the trees rather than wanting to explore, and you want to stay still or turn back. That's the idea of how kind of trauma can have a lasting impact on a child's expectations of the world and what's in store for it, and particularly how safe it is. And as we move through this presentation today, we'll think about, how can we change the record there? How can we change that soundtrack? So we talked a bit about how trauma can affect development. But I'd like to just focus for a bit on what this might look like in real life, especially in a nursery or preschool setting, where children might be meeting new adults, following new rules, and just experiencing new expectations like sharing and waiting for other people. So again, in the chat, if you wouldn't mind, please just throw out a few suggestions. What behaviours might we see in children that have experienced trauma? What emotional states might we find them in? And just without naming anyone specific in your setting, just suggest some examples, please, of behaviours or responses that you've seen in your setting that you think might be a clue that a child has experienced trauma, or at least some adverse experiences. Yeah, Alicia, yeah, separation anxiety, for sure. Withdrawal. Thank you, Dundry, yeah. Emotional meltdowns, yeah, absolutely. Being dysregulated, withdrawal, hypersensitive, yeah, dysregulated again. Yeah, anger, aggression, clinginess. Um, what's funny is like with some of these examples, we're seeing like behavior that's at different ends of a spectrum, like people being really aggressive or people being really clingy. One is sort of like reaching out for help, and the other one is maybe lashing out. But they both, I totally agree, could be examples of trauma. This is an overwhelming amount of answers. I do really appreciate it. I just got to catch up with where I'm at. Yeah, people might display challenging or unwanted behavior. The child might be recalling their experiences. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, children in our settings, if we've worked a lot in earlier settings, we see children replaying events from their history, from their life, and sometimes those include things which were really traumatic or difficult to process. I'll talk a little bit about that later. Yeah, hitting out, yeah, meltdowns, shouting, being angry, reluctant to eat. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that one, Amanda, actually, but you're absolutely right. Yeah, yeah. Dependent on adults, reluctance to play with peers. Yeah, being frightened of sudden noises. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, startled easily. Dysregulation again. Yeah, totally agree, Joe. Unpredictable behavior for sure. Becoming mute. Yeah, withdrawn. Yeah, overlap there. Quiet or angry or biting, and that coming out in their play. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, you can sometimes see in the way that children play that they're reflecting, what they know about interactions, and how, what aggression can get you, if you use it. Difficulty making connections. Yeah, I assume, Kate, you mean with other people there. Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of like that. Difficulties with attachment. Regression. Yes, Kelly. Yeah, totally. Yeah, showing behavior that you might associate with younger children. Yeah, regression in skills, absolutely. Attachment issues, yeah. Resistance to get close to anyone, yeah. Again, overlap with attachment there for sure. Behaviors that are challenging, difficulty. I'm just going to skim through for ones that are sort of new top concepts here. Difficulty concentrating, yes, Rebecca. Yeah, for sure. It can be very distracting, a kind of like threat detection mode. Um, Yeah, excessive fearfulness, yeah, being easily started. Thank you, Haley. Yeah, difficulty with adult comfort. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, not wanting to be comforted even when we can see that they need to be comforted. Um, Regressions, yeah, need for routine and reliability. Gemma, don't jump ahead too much about what we might do to help them. But thank you for that. Play themes around danger. Yeah, emotional outbursts and delays in development. Yeah, totally, Haley. Yeah, it can affect development. Um, I think there's actually a huge variety in the examples that we've given there. I agree with all of them. I don't think any of those are out of place or not relevant in this kind of discussion at all. There might even be more that weren't on that list. To be honest, I can't think of any. But you know, what it's showing is that trauma can affect children in lots of different ways, and it's not all the same sort of like flavor of effect that it has on people. It doesn't always mean that people are going to be angry and in your face. At the same time, trauma can make someone withdrawn or quiet or scared or fearful. So we get these kind of like dichotomies of people at different ends of behavior spectrums. Um, but generally, it does result in behavior which is unusual or at an extreme, end of one of those kind of spectrums. Um, what you know we see with trauma, and what we're doing in some of those answers is we're observing behavior that we can see on the surface, and we're just interpreting that and realizing this tells me about something which is going on under the surface. And as I'm sure we know, the stuff that's under the surface is often much bigger and deeper than what we see on the top, because that's just the tip of the iceberg. Um, my, just interpretation of what the needs are of children who've experienced trauma, and there'll be more than this, but really it's about their need for safety and trust and connection with other people, especially the people giving care or looking after them. Um, by the way, for anyone that didn't attend the version of this training this time last year, it was purely focused on behavior as communication, and using this sort of iceberg model to think about challenging behavior, not just ones related to trauma. Um, and there are some videos about that on the North Somerset EPS YouTube page, which I can link in chat later if anyone's interested. Um, Something going back to that idea of how do we know that someone might have experienced trauma or ACEs. Something I'll always remember, a lecturer in family therapy told me was, if you want to know how a child feels, sometimes think about how they make you feel. Um, and I don't think this is always true, but it often is true. Um, and children that feel scared make us feel scared. People that are fearful or scared inside do things which make us feel scared or threatened. Um, Children that are angry, that feel angry, often do things which make us feel angry as adults. And at the other end of the scale, children that are happy inside often make us feel happy. Um, this is based on the idea, which really comes from attachment theory, which is basically that we can only learn to understand and accept emotions when we see our caregivers experience them and cope with them. So the idea that if I have a strong feeling as a baby, as a toddler, as a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, I want to learn about that feeling, and the best way for me to learn to accept it and cope with that feeling is by watching the people that give me care experience it and cope with it, role model and show me how they cope with it. And often children that have experienced a lot of trauma haven't had caregivers or parents doing that for them. Um, so I'm just gonna finish off this kind of discussion about the impact of trauma, by summarizing what research into trauma and those ACEs tells us. Firstly, the impact of trauma on emotions, which just basically the research says if children experience trauma in their early life, they're working out or strengthening or feeding the areas of the brain that handle stress. This becomes like a habit or a deep pattern of responding to the world. In some rarer cases, children become so fearful that they learn it's safest to withdraw and shut down. They avoid expressing needs or feelings because usually their experience is something bad or scary happens when they go out and they need something or express that they want something. Um, that can be a really sad thing. Sometimes that's actually more challenging, if you ask me, than the children that are kind of lashing out and dysregulated, the ones that have almost gone past that and gone into their shell. Um, we have the impact of trauma on behavior. When children have learned that the world is unsafe, their behavior usually tells the story. They might be impulsive, struggle with change, find it very hard to separate from adults. What's really common is known as hypervigilance. Someone mentioned it in the chat earlier. And what we mean by hypervigilance is this kind of constant state of threat detection, which can look like a lack of concentration or sort of distractedness. Um, but it's not really lack of concentration in the old-fashioned sense. It's more a survival response. It's that need to constantly look like who's that outside the window, who's that coming through the door, what's that sound, what's that smell? Because the world has been so scary that children interpret those changes as potential threats and are therefore constantly on the lookout for them, which means that they can appear distracted or lacking in focus. And one of the biggest effects of trauma that's really well established is on relationships, especially children's relationships with caregivers and authority figures, which we also call attachment relationships or attachments. Trauma makes it difficult for children to trust other people. Some might cling tightly to adults, others might push adults away. Both are sort of protective strategies. They're defense mechanisms. They're ways that children keep themselves safe. It's based on their life experiences, whether or not it's safe to let people get close, or whether it's safer to push people away. There are examples of different types of attachment on in the image on the screen. It would be very easy to do a full, hour and a half just on types of attachment. So I won't go into too much depth on that. The only thing I'll say is when I send the link to the North Somerset EPS YouTube page in the chat at the end of this presentation, there is a short video, I think it's like 6-7 minutes, just on attachment theory and how we can kind of use some techniques related to positive attachments in early years settings to help children that have poor quality, attachments in their life. Next, there's the impact of trauma on learning and play. And the idea here is basically that because so much energy is going into survival, children might find it harder to focus on play and learning. We sometimes see delays in their language, their play, or their problem solving, not because the child isn't capable, but because their brains are basically preoccupied, just full up with needing to stay safe, needing to protect themselves. Again, this might look like a concentration difficulty, or it might look like a lack of ability, but that's not necessarily the case. Often for children with trauma, it's just that their brain is at maximum capacity, looking out for those potential threats. And trauma, I should say, sorry guys, I should just say we will have a break. I don't know if I mentioned that already, but we will have a break. I've set my alarm for like in a few minutes time, so we will have like a comfort break in a minute. So sorry, I should have said that. It doesn't just affect trauma, that is, doesn't just affect emotions and behavior. It can also show up physically and affect physical health. In particular, raised stress hormones can lead to sleep difficulties, which in turn can lead to more bugs and infections. Sometimes we see the effect of trauma on children's motor skills. Children that have become very wary or scared of the world are less likely to take risks, and it will affect their physical development, their balance, their core strength, and their coordination. Um, Over long-term studies of children that have experienced trauma, and that's particular studies of children who've lost parents, or parents who've children that have been abused, and placed in care. um, Consistently, it's found that those groups of children have worse health outcomes on all sorts of measures, from dental health to just about everything. Um, and there are some quite famous studies of soldiers with diagnosed PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. So just the idea of that you've experienced really stressful, traumatic things in a war zone, and taken that back with you. But studies of those soldiers, um, showed that their life expectancy on average was reduced by 12 years, compared to non-soldiers. And the idea was basically that there is a really toxic effect that long-term stress has on your health. Whether that's because it affects sleep, or does other kinds of damage. I'm definitely not an expert in that. But long-term stress, severe stress, overwhelming stress, undoubtedly has a really negative effect on people's health, and on children's physical development. I'm going to finish this little section off with a summary. And that's really that research clearly shows that early trauma affects a whole child. It affects how they think, how they feel, how they interact. It doesn't look the same for every child, but by observing children over time, we might see patterns that tell us about an underlying need which is related to scary or traumatic experiences in their life. Um, I should add that obviously not all of these examples are like definitive proof of trauma. Most of the time, kids are just kids. They test boundaries, they do weird and unpredictable things, they make mistakes, they push our buttons, they get ill and distracted, and they refuse to sleep sometimes. Um, and this presentation, my purpose is not about diagnosing trauma, or looking for it everywhere we turn. It's just about having the awareness that it's one possible explanation for behavior which we see in our settings that might otherwise be confusing or challenging. Um, and if we have evidence, or we collect evidence that or find are given evidence that trauma is indeed a factor in a child's life experiences, then it's important to think about what we can do to help those children move forward. um, I think before we move on to the next topic, I think I've been talking for just over half an hour, so maybe it's time to just take a break there. And then I'll move on to talking about some of those strategies, about things that we can do, and things that we already do that help children that have experienced trauma. My laptop clock says it's 8:06. Is 10 minutes enough time for a break? I'm imagining that then when we come back, I might talk for another half an hour or thereabouts, and then there'll be some time for questions, or comments and that kind of thing. So I don't want anyone to be here longer than they need to be. So I hope that, do shout if you disagree, but otherwise, let's go for a 10-minute break, and I'll start. I'm just going to give people another minute to come back. In the meantime, I'll get the link to the Educational Psychology Service page. Suppose the only thing by saying people feel free to turn your camera off is I'm not sure how many empty seats are out there now. But it's been 10 minutes, so I'm just going to carry on and at least doing this online if time. Okay, so yeah, that was a kind of a convenient place to stop because we're just summarizing. Oops, that wasn't what I wanted to do. We're just summarizing the impact that trauma can have on people, on children. And I will now just have a little uh, uh, topic shift to what can we do? Importantly, what can we do in early year settings to help children that have experienced trauma? Um, and I'm going to start that by just encouraging people to think about what do we do already in our settings that help children feel safe. It doesn't have to be anything too exciting, just anything. If we start to think about the activities, um, the routines, the resources, the physical things we provide, what do we have what do you have in your earlier setting that helps children feel safe? And again, please just throw a few answers in chat. Oh, lovely. Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Gemma. There seems to be a lot of overlap here, which is really nice. But in terms of themes, yeah, visual timeline, now and next board. So that's kind of the safety of knowing what's coming next and predictable routines. A key person approach, yeah, totally. That's a really good example. Being present and consistent, yeah, consistency, absolutely. I'll talk more about that. Key person being mentioned a few times. Yeah, home visits, Helen. Yeah, I think not every setting does that, but in terms of creating links and relationships with young people and their families, that's a really high level example. Consistent routines. Amanda here saying that we use the nurture pack to plan with all staff and parents. Really nice, yeah. Nurture, as a theme, totally fits in with this kind of topic of trauma and ACEs. We're talking about nurture, which is almost like the emphasis and the core of that is replacing and making up for experiences and early experiences that might not have been nurturing. Yeah, Kelly and Rebecca talking about calm corner and cozy den. Yeah, calming spaces, absolutely. Now and then board, visual prompts, routines. Um, yeah, thank you. Safe space, puppets. Yeah, Helen, that's a really good one. Puppets. Yeah, it might allow us to do role play. A listening ear, Mandy. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, letting children know that someone's listening is paramount. Magdalena, establishing routines, consistency, and support. Lovely. Thank you. Yeah, a calm environment. Yeah, totally, Helen. Connecting with your support system. Yeah, I wonder if Magdalena, if you mean with your family, with families, or support system between staff members. Both of those I think would apply. An open door policy. Yeah, I think I know what you mean by that, Joe, in terms of the environment. Not an open door policy meaning everyone's welcome, maybe, but I'm assuming you're actually meaning that there aren't sort of yeah that doors are physically left open. Um, Minimizing stimuli, yeah, using headphones for children that struggle with overwhelming noise or sounds. Yeah, so just keeping sensory overwhelm to a minimum. Gemma, yeah, thank you. Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. Thank you, Magdalena. Helping children express feelings through play. Thank you. Yeah, lovely example. I'll talk more about that as well. Um, Okay, so yeah, lots of uh, really, really nice examples. And I'm just going to hope that this, yeah, great. Um, the the theme in those responses, I'm glad matches what I hoped it would and what I've put on this slide, which is just, what really helps children who've experienced trauma is just that everyday stuff that makes them feel safe, calm, cared for, and connected. Um, there's this kind of summary which I'll come back to, which is just, these are things which we would do for our own children, especially our own little children, babies, toddlers, um, and doing them for children that may be a bit older in our settings. It is part of that thing that Amanda mentioned. It's about nurture. It's doing what a sensitive, skilled, and loving parent does. Um, so let's look at some further examples of this, what we would call like a trauma-informed approach. And we'll start with just practical playroom strategies that we can implement as individual practitioners with either individual children or groups of children. Before I go on, although I've talked about how severe the impact of trauma can be, it's also the category of SEN, of special needs, that needs the least sort of specialist resources or even money to put right. Probably the biggest costs of being trauma informed and trauma responsive are just investments in with patience and empathy. Um, but we don't need, special technology to do it. We don't need special training. We just kind of need time and care to do these things. And the first really important strategy, which some people touched upon already, is using predictable and consistent routines whenever we can. Children who've experienced trauma often live with a lot of uncertainty. Predictable routines help them know what's coming next, which gives them a sense of safety. Simple things make a big difference, like having the same morning greeting every morning, using the same songs for tidy up time, or using a visual timetable. Safe spaces are just as important. These might be cozy corners with soft furnishings, a calm down tent, sensory areas with distracting and calming objects like heavy blankets, light up projectors, fidget toys. Having spaces like this in our setting sends children a powerful message, which is just, you're safe here, and there's somewhere for you to reset when things feel too much. This one maybe slightly less obvious, but we did have examples in the chat, and we might call this co-regulation. Children aren't born knowing how to calm themselves down. They learn it by experiencing calm alongside an adult, and that's what we call co-regulation. We often use the phrase co-regulation before self-regulation, which means that before we ask a child to calm down, we try to calm down together. It sometimes involves matching a child's level of emotion. I think this is a really useful strategy and sometimes one that people are a bit scared to do. But again, it goes back to what a parent does, but it's mirroring or matching the level of emotion a child shows us. So if a child's toy tower has fallen over, it's about saying, "Oh my God, the tower's gone. Oh no, what are we going to do?" And showing that we feel that kind of level of shock or frustration that they feel shows that we understand how they're feeling. Um, and we accept how we're feeling, and we're capable of feeling it ourselves. And it might also look like sitting quite quietly next to that child and breathing slowly and offering a gentle voice or wondering about their feelings, like saying, I wonder if you were angry because your tower got knocked over. It's like a mum or a carer acts with their baby. Baby cries, baby's stressed, mum feels stressed due to the crying. And so they've started off at the same level of emotion, both stressed or distressed, and they calm down together. And that's because mum is using soothing words and noises and actions. So co-regulation is that idea of meeting at the same emotional state and calming down together. At the heart of trauma-informed practice is relationships. Um, if we're going to help people move on from trauma, we need to be really tuned in to how that child is feeling. And learning to read a child takes time and patience and attention. So a key person approach is often the best method for that. The key person just needs to show the same qualities that a sensitive parent shows. This is often boiled down to these things on the screen: patience, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. So we give children time, we accept how they're feeling, we're curious, we wonder how they're feeling, and we empathize. We say that we understand. Uh, like parents, key persons, key people don't have to be perfect. They just need to give children the message, I see you, I hear you, you're important to me. Um, Play as a form of therapy. I'm not talking about like play therapy specifically, but it's all the same thing really. And it's just the idea that play is a child's kind of language. Through play, they process their feelings, they tell us their stories, and they can sometimes change their relationship with past events, with their memories. Children might repeatedly play out themes of danger and rescue, or spend a long time nurturing a baby doll. And this is their way of working through experiences they've had. Sometimes they might even act out specific life events in pretend play. And when we allow them to do this while staying nearby and being a calm and safe figure, we can help them process their life events. And it's actually similar to how therapists treat adults with PTSD. Um, I may have made up a word here, re-traumatizing, but I think it kind of makes sense. And what I mean is, sometimes without meaning to, adults can accidentally re-trigger feelings of trauma, harsh tones, raised voices, sudden changes, or shaming language can make children feel unsafe again. The experience of shame in particular is one of the most traumatic non-physical experiences a child can have. I don't mean like public humiliation. I just mean the language that we use to respond to behavior can either be shaming or non-shaming. For example, if a child spills a drink, a shaming response is like, "You're so clumsy, you always make a mess. Why can't you be like the other children?" Um, a better response, especially for a child with trauma or ACEs in their early life, is something like, "Oh dear, an accident, let's clean it up together." Um, if we want to reduce the chances of adding to stress and help children feel secure instead, we need to separate the challenging or unwanted behavior from the child as a person. Um, and that kind of phrase that I often use if I have to. I used it with my nephew recently. Is separating that behavior from the child by saying, for such a clever boy, that was a silly thing, or for such a kind girl, that wasn't very helpful. And we're kind of showing that we value the person and their personality, but we can separate the behavior and still recognize that the behavior might not have been the best idea. Um, so let's quickly revisit that summary of trauma-informed approaches from earlier. Basically, helping children move on from trauma is about applying the same principles we'd use with our own children or nephews or nieces or otherwise, loved children. We're trying to reset the children's expectation that the world is scary and unsafe and unpredictable. And if we keep that in mind, let's just think about how we might adapt again in chat, if you will, please. How can we adapt a daily routine in our settings to make it more trauma informed? Can anyone think of an example of a change or something they do already which helps children feel safe, calm, connected, or cared for? We had some lovely examples already, but I'm just wondering if anyone has reflected with any of those examples that I've just touched on, and how they could be sort of used in an early years setting in a real life situation. Alicia, yeah, thank you. Bringing a transitional object from home, that's a really nice one. Yeah, so some kind of connection. with parent or with home with like a safe space. Helen, yeah, reducing group size, making things not as loud or as busy. I mean, that goes back to the kind of that idea of like sensory calming. Um, I'm just going through the list of people in the room. Someone's mic is not muted and it's kind of buzzing a little bit. It's really quiet for me, so it's not a problem. But I know that some people who are will be more sensitive to sound, shall we say, might be being uh, affected by that. Karen, um, using a worry box, somewhere a child can put their worries for a trusted adult to read. That's a really lovely example. Yeah. If children are capable of like expressing a worry, yeah, having a kind of box and knowing that there's something kind of symbolic about putting a worry in a box and it being physically held. It means like it's being held onto later, and it's not been forgotten. And a trusted adult might read it. That's a really lovely one. Amanda has written, make any reasonable adjustments we can and being consistent. Yeah, for sure. As I said, it's not we're not perfect, right? We can't all be perfect all the time. Life is challenging and throws things at us, but the goal of being consistent is a really good one. Rebecca's put weave in calm down moments. Yeah, between busy activities. Yeah, that's a really, really lovely one, Rebecca. Yeah, so breathing, games, yoga, stretches, stories. So this is kind of the idea that if we've got busy activities, things which are exciting our brain, then weaving in calm down moments is just building that muscle and strengthening that practice of being able to calm down, having something exciting and high energy and practicing calming down and doing that as a regular or habitual practice is a really nice example. Chloe Gill has put group times to be short and the same each day. Yeah, going back to consistency. Yeah, an empathy puppet, Helen. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we can role play, we can act out puppets being empathetic, caring and understanding how other puppets feel. Kate's book, give children their own job role. For example, help. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, giving children a role or a responsibility is such a nice way of helping them feel valued and like they belong in a setting. Being consistent between all grown-ups and their responses. Yeah, 100% Millie. I mean, I'm actually going to come on to that in a second, but that's a really important example at a kind of like organizational level. Gemma has written all of the children in her setting and staff have photo albums with photos of their life, and they enjoy looking through them to feel connected to their special people while they're setting, and can take it anywhere in the setting with them. Yeah, that's really nice in terms of kind of like that anchor with your real life. Or real life, I mean, home life. Social stories, yeah, Alicia, yeah, social stories people don't know. I mean, really simply, it's kind of like cartoons that explain social situations, minimal words, lots of pictures and visuals, and just help children that otherwise might be delayed or have some difficulty understanding how or why people are behaving in a certain way, help them with that. And Rebecca's put make feelings check-ins more frequently, not just when they first come in. Yeah, a lot of settings will have like an emotions register. So as you arrive, you say how you're feeling. But doing that more frequently, yeah, it can't hurt. I think there's a really nice sort of note to end on that. A lot of this stuff, it if there was something which worked instantly to correct or put right early trauma, we'd all know about it. Do you know what I mean? Someone would be selling it to us and make an absolute fortune. There is no quick fix. But there are lots of things that do gradually build up and make a big difference. And the examples that you've been giving there are really lovely ones of those sorts of things. And by doing them consistently, we can have a massive impact on children. Thank you. Let's move on. We are coming into the kind of home stretch, so to speak. Yeah, so that last bit was focusing on what we can do as an individual with individual children. But trauma-informed practice also needs to sit at a kind of organizational level, our whole setting. And that's about the culture of the whole setting, not just the actions of one practitioner. And we'll look at four big pieces of that kind of picture. Firstly, what's really important is just the well-being of staff. We can't pour from an empty cup. If we're working with children who've experienced trauma, it is draining. It's exhausting sometimes. And if we are stressed out or burnt out, it's much harder to stay calm and to be consistent for the children. So staff well-being really matters. And it can be just as simple as making sure our staff get proper breaks, encouraging other people to take breaks when we notice they haven't, just checking in, just asking colleagues how they're doing. And and having a culture where it's okay to say to each other, bloody hell, that was a nightmare, or that was difficult. There's nothing wrong with that. It's really important to express that sometimes. Consistency, someone mentioned that a second ago. Children who've experienced trauma are especially sensitive to mixed messages. They're on the lookout for threats, and especially for broken promises or rejection. And if one adult responds warmly and another responds harshly, it often confuses and unsettles them, and they dwell on it. Consistency doesn't mean, we're all robots exactly the same, acting the same all the time. It just means we share the same core approach or principles, and in this case, that's all about being calm, safe, and predictable. Probably the best way to have to try to help consistency in an organization is just with a really clear shared behavior policy. The early years area Senko team that Sarah and Liz, who are in the chat, are part of, have a great up-to-date behavior policy that's from their team, which can be used in your setting or adapted to your setting. Another organizational level thing is about working with parents and doing it sensitively. Parents and carers of children that have experienced trauma sometimes, and I might even go as far as to say often, also carry their own experiences of trauma. So our approach with them matters hugely. It's about working in partnership with them and avoiding a sense of judgment. Parents who feel judged might withdraw or become defensive. I think even the best parents in the world still feel guilt and feel doubt and feel defensive when things, when they're questioned about what they do at home. But if parents feel respected and included, they're more likely to share important insights, like things which we really value knowing about a child, like their comfort object or what would be a good transitional object, like someone mentioned earlier. And they're more likely to respect our approaches and take them into their home and copy them at home. And lastly, at an organizational level, it's really important we know when and how to seek support. Sometimes children and families need more than we can provide within our setting. Some children we might only see for 3 hours, 6 hours a week. And we're only human, and we're only one part of the jigsaw. But knowing when and how to reach out for external support is part of being trauma informed. That might mean talking to your Senko or your INCO, involving health visitors, linking with other specialist services. There's actually more family support available in North Somerset than a lot of people think, and quite a few services are under publicised and underused. The portal for accessing all early help services is called North Somerset Front Door, and it's easy to find on Google if you search North Somerset Front Door. I can also post the phone number in chat if anyone wants it, and it's under a social services, children's social care banner. But it has a lot of services that support families that are not sort of old-fashioned social worker. There are services that work alongside social workers. Okay, thank you for watching. There's just only a little bit more now. I just wanted to give a kind of like personal insight or reflection, which is just working with children, especially children that have experienced trauma, is a hard job. And God knows we don't do it for the money or the status, but it can be mega rewarding, and helping kids move on from trauma and bad starts in life is one of the biggest rewards we can get. in the kind of like early years field. When I meet with older students and young adults that had tough backgrounds, they nearly all have one thing in common, which is a connection with a special person at their preschool or at their primary school that taught them a different way, that taught them that adults can be safe and trusted. And it's very possible you'll be that person, whether it's to just one child or to many children. So, look after yourselves. This is that idea of like to take care of the caretaker. Look after yourself. Dealing with strong emotions is difficult. It can be contagious. Like I was saying earlier, children make you feel how they feel inside, and that can be very challenging. It's totally fine to know your own trigger points, things which upset you, whether that's, whatever it is, whether it's a tone of voice or being spat at, it can be all sorts of things, but knowing yourself and what triggers you and walking away and calming yourself when you need to is a crucial part of being, trauma informed and trauma responsive. Asking for help and accepting help is important. A lot of us are very proud people, and especially when we're at work, we're in a kind of work mode, and we find that difficult. But it's such difficult work. The emotions of young children that have experienced trauma are so heavy. The air is pregnant with them sometimes in early years settings. You can't escape how powerful, how strong, and how raw some of these emotions are. So it's really important to ask for help and accept it. It's not like working in an office. The whole atmosphere is full of emotion. Yeah, lastly, have a debrief after challenging incidents. Try and talk to a colleague or talk to a friend or talk to a partner, or talk to anyone really. I mean, you need to talk about what you've experienced. Debrief, get it off your chest. Don't bottle it up. And just above all, look after yourself. And that's basically it for my presentation. If I could just summarize all the research in this area as simply as possible, it's about treating children with ACEs how we would treat our own children or younger family members. Maybe not the little brother you always fought with, but basically just trying to make those children feel safe and accepted and valued. And if we can do that, we can reset their expectations of the world and give their brain a chance to develop its thinking structures rather than cycling through high stress, fight or flight kind of loops. None of this is mandatory, of course, but it can be useful. I think when I reflect on training that I've been to sometimes think about in the moment rather than letting it get away from me. If there is anything that a piece of training has made me think, I could try that in my practice, I could do that differently, or especially if I can do more of that, or I can celebrate the fact that I do that, then I always try to to make a note of it for when I look back on the training. So again, I'll stick around for a while. If anybody wants to make some suggestions of things that they might take back to their own practice and or their own earlier setting, please share them in chat. I'm sure if you're thinking it, someone else is, or you'll be helping someone else by writing it. We've got until 9 o'clock in theory. But no obligation to stick around. I'll see if Sarah has any kind of like closing words, but if anyone wants to put any kind of comments or questions in chat, I'll do my best to respond to them. I'll also just put that link again in the chat to the Educational Psychology Service YouTube page, which has a couple of videos, like I said, on behavior as communication and attachment. So yeah, thank you for watching. Thank you for giving up time in your evening. And I hope you found something in here, useful or at least interesting and relevant to your role in an earlier setting. Thank you.
Josh, there is one question just come into the chat. in your experience, would you say that neurodivergent children experience trauma more? And is there a link between neurodivergence and trauma?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's really subjective, Gemma. It's hard for me to say that. I think, obviously neurodivergence can refer to a lot of things, but I think what's typical when we think about what would separate a child as being neurodivergent, very often we're talking about children with autism, for example. Obviously, I'm simplifying things, but and what do children with autism have in common? Well, again, it's a very diverse group, but they often have difficulties with language, delays in language development, and difficulties in social understanding. And that means predicting other people's behavior and interpreting their behavior, making sense of it. So if you're talking about a group of children that experience trauma, and a subset of that group have a difficulty with language, which is how we process our experiences and our memories. We talk to ourselves about what's happened. And if they have difficulty with social understanding, which means making sense, why did that person do that? What would their motivation be? Then absolutely they would experience more, more harm from trauma. Um, so I think, yeah, I think there is a very reasonable argument that can be made that neurodivergent children are especially vulnerable if they experience trauma. Um, Obviously, there are probably subdivisions or categories within neurodivergent groups, but I think broadly speaking, yes, there is a link, and yes, the impact and consequences are more severe for those groups of children. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, thank you ever so much, everybody. I'm sure everybody wants to thank Josh too. As we say, we will be around till about 9 o'clock. Liz Owen, Maria Powell, and Sam Dockrell are also on this training, as well as myself, Sarah Evans. So we are on the end of the phone if you need any help with policies, or if you just need somebody to talk to, then we're always here for you to call us. Can I just do a plug for our next training sessions that are coming out? We have introduced a part 1 to our nurture pack training. What we found last year was for educators that needed to apply for top-up funding, there wasn't always sufficient evidence of frequency, intensity, and duration of behaviours when they were applying for certain categories and certain levels of top-up funding. So we have actually introduced something new called FID training. It's on the 8th of October and it is online for 1 hour. It will be part 1 of the Nurture Pack training, so you will be expected to do both parts. But do take a look at iLearn. It may help you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for the kind comments in chat as well. I'm sorry that my dog's just started barking right at the last minute there. I don't know how loud that is on the setting.
No,
on
we
the
can't
on the
hear it.
camera. Okay. There'll be a leaf rustling outside the front door or something, like the most minor thing in the world that set him off.
I'm going to stop recording. I can remember.
Thank you, Helen. I will, like I said in that email, Sarah, I will